Hello and welcome to our Shared Ownership Masterclass. Now this is brought to you by Shared Ownership Week, and this, if you like, is the grand finale. Now, we've had a number of webinars throughout the week, which you will be able to go back to and on the website and look through at your leisure. But today, it's all about getting a bit more information from our expert panel, of which I'm delighted to introduce to you now. Now, Runjan to my immediate right, Hanjan, rather. Runjan, you are the MD of Sensio, aren't you? Tell me a bit more about your company.
Well, first her name's Rupi.
That's a great start, isn't it, Rupi? I've known Rupi for now a year and a half. You just put him Runjan. Well, you looked at me funny then, Rupi. Rupi, tell me about Sensio.
So we started the business about 14 years ago, and we specialise in affordable, namely shared ownership, and predominantly work in the southeast and around London. And I've been invited along today with my colleagues to talk about shared ownership.
Now, we've got a bit of glamour, again, with Jade. Now, Jade, you bought your first property at 22 years old. I mean, I dread to think what I was doing at 22. How did that come about?
Having no life, to be honest with you. So everything was sacrificed, but it was worth it in the end, definitely was.
Good. I would love to hear your points and hopefully some tips of how to get on the property ladder and your experience during that, well, quite exciting time, I should think. Now, Chris Rowell, you're Director of the Residential Investment at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, which is a housing association, is that right?
It is, yeah. I mean, as we know, we've got a housing crisis going on. Organisations like mine are there to help in any way we can to help alleviate that.
Okay, so we've got some great experience across the board, and these guys will be here to answer your questions. Now, this is what we're calling, it's a hybrid event, really, and it's really about you. The more you give us, the more we get to discuss. So we're going to be asking you for questions to the panel towards the end of our presentation, but we'll also be firing out some questions and some polls as we go through. So I think we're going to start off with that, and I think it's going to be an easy one to start off with. We're going to be asking you, where are you all tuning in from today? So this should be coming up on your screens at the moment. So if you'd like to engage and tell us where you're, which city you're joining from. I don't know, I'm thinking London's going to be popular, but this is not just about the southeast. This is about the entire country. So hopefully, oh, hello, Northumberland. I've just come down from Northumberland last night. I've just moved to Newcastle. Why are you? Well, look at that. Well, you're from all over.
Amazing.
Wow. Well, it's great to have you all here. Now, I think we can flip it out. There's a lot of people engaging. This is really, really good. And as I said, we want you to engage as much as possible, especially with the question and answers section, because this is about you. We've had a great week of webinars, which you can go back to and have a look. But this is your opportunity to put some questions to us, and we will be asking the most important questions or the most popular questions later on. So I think we can probably start off with topic number one, Rupi.
Okay.
Now, simple question, but it gets lots of funny answers. So we're going to put a poll out, and it's, what is shared ownership? Now, the potential answers are, it's a share of a home with a stranger. The other one is, it's when you purchase shares in a company. And lastly, a scheme where you buy a share of a property owned by a housing association and pay rent on the remaining proportion. So, if you have a look at your computer screens, you've got those options. Give yourself an answer and press the button. Now, what are we looking at? 2% of you reckon you have to share your property with a stranger, but I think most of you are going to get this right. Now, it is, of course, shared ownership means you will be buying with, hopefully, a housing association. Now, why don't you tell us a bit more about, give us an overview from your point of view from a housing association, Kush?
Yeah, so we're not-for-profit organisations. So everything we do and everything we work on essentially is about building homes and helping people. We get a little bit of money from the government to do this, but most of our activity is about helping people who want to own a home or people who need help to rent. And I think the main point really to think about is when you're buying your first home, the person you're buying it from, their motivations and what they're about is quite an important thing. And what you get with a housing association is an organisation that's set up for the benefit of society. We're there to help people.
So there's private enterprises, there's private companies that operate within the shared ownership sector. Why do housing associations exist then? Because you said something quite interesting there. You're there to help people get their first home. Why do you exist then?
Yeah, we simply put, we exist because in our country we have a housing crisis, right? We don't have enough homes for the people that need them. We have a lot of homes that people can't afford, and that's where we come in. We're there to help level that playing field, give people access to a property that's suitable for what they need in an area where they need to live at a price that they can afford.
Now, Jade, when you bought, how long ago was it when you bought?
4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yes.
20. My math says you're about 26 years old.
I just turned 27, so
See?
close.
So you bought at 22 years old, which is, I mean, it's quite something to behold, isn't it, at that age? It's very brave. It
Yeah.
shows you a lot of determination. Did you know about shared ownership when you bought?
No. So it wasn't something that was being talked about. And I think at the age that I was, where I would get most of my information would be online. And
Yeah.
there wasn't much access to that online from people that I could understand.
Yeah.
So at the time, no, I didn't know anything about shared ownership. I just knew about the traditional route, which obviously meant a lot of savings, a lot of sacrificing, as I've always mentioned, over quite a long period of time. So no, I didn't know about it.
And so now, would you consider shared ownership now?
I would consider it now if I was struggling to get my deposit together,
Yeah.
absolutely, because I do believe in home ownership.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great way to sort of get your first step onto the ladder. So yeah.
And crudely put, it's kind of skin in the game as well, isn't it? For yourself, I mean, not for you, Jade, but for Rupert, it's you provide mortgages, but people are coming to you wanting to get that first step on the ladder that have been unable to do so through traditional conventional means.
No, absolutely. As long as properties now, residential properties, recognised as an asset class, which grows. So it's better to have part of that asset class than nothing at all.
Yeah.
So if you bought a 25% share of something worth £400,000, you've got £100,000 in the game. And in 10 years' time, hopefully that'll be worth more, which is better than not having anything there.
Well, I've got an amazing stat here that, I mean, it's talking about you don't need to save for years. The average deposit for a shared ownership home in London, or the South East, sits at £12,900, okay? Put that against the average for a traditional property at £58,000. That opens it up to a complete range of people that would never normally get anywhere near their first property.
Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
And you must be dealing with people from all walks of life and maybe different ages. We'll probably come on to that a bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. A lot of people think shared ownership, it's really young people and that's all it is. Actually, there's a broad group of people. But when you think about it, it's about having access to a home that you can access with a smaller deposit, but it's also a cost that you can manage. Most people are used to the idea of renting a home. You have your monthly cost. The way shared ownership works is normally the monthly cost is there or thereabouts of what you pay to rent locally in that area.
So this is a little quiz for the viewers now. Let's see if people are listening. So the next, we've probably covered a little bit of this, but let's see if you're listening. Next poll to go out. What is a housing association? And I don't want this to be like a school day, but we are trying to really drill down and give you guys some proper information about who is involved in this part of the world and how this part of the world works, how shared ownership works for you as a buyer. So what is a shared ownership? Is it a not-for-profit organisation set up to provide affordable homes and support local communities? Is it the department of a council that's responsible for social housing, which a lot of people might think that as well? Or is it an organisation set up for selling properties? I mean, kind of. There's a bit of truth in all three of those, but see how we get on. Here we go. Some people weren't listening. 12% said the department of a council, 14% of the department is of a council responsible for social housing. And I kind of get that because it's got shared ownership. It kind of has that feel to it. There's an element of philanthropy, maybe. There's an element of helping people, which a lot of people associate with local authorities. But indeed, it isn't that at all, is it?
It's not. And it's funny you mention that. I just remember back to when I got my first job in this sector. When I was 21, 22, went home, told my dad, and he said, "Oh, you're working for the council." And I had to educate my dad, as we do a lot of people, because we're nothing to do with the council. We work very closely with them because they are responsible for providing a lot of services, and we want to want to work closely with them, but we're an independent private organisation. We're funded in a number of different ways. But the ultimate aim that we've got is to help people live their life as well as they can by giving them a decent home. And we totally get the power a home has on your life chances, your health, you know, thinking right now where we are and what's going on. Such an important thing to the quality of your life is having that good quality home that's around you. And that's our purpose and what we're about.
But you are operating in a sphere of free enterprise and private practice. So you wouldn't necessarily, as a buyer, just have to go to you as a housing association and look for the property. You can surely approach a private mortgage broker and fund it that way. Is that not right, Rupi?
Well, they'll fund the building of the property.
Yeah.
And selling the property will fund the share that you buy. So you could have a property, buy a 40% share, and you'll pay rent on the rest of it. But coming to a specialist broker like ourselves, we work out if you're approved for that property, i.e. do you qualify to buy it, and what you can afford, whether you can actually afford the property, taking into account the rent and the mortgage.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do, you want to lend responsibly. So you don't want to be irresponsible in your lending, and you've got to make sure that person can afford the property. And that's what the broker does, as well as provide the mortgage.
I think going back to what Jade said earlier as well, just 4 years ago, you didn't really know much about shared ownership, and a lot of people had misconceptions about shared ownership. Or you'll never be able to sell it on. There won't be as many people that want the property later on. Do you really want to tie yourself into that kind of housing style or apartment style? The information wasn't really out there, and the information that was given from people probably coming from maybe a point of ignorance. And this dialogue that we're having goes to show that there is dialogue available, there is information available from housing associations direct, from private developers. Estate agents now know about shared ownership a lot more. And you can talking more and more to a mortgage broker, they will hopefully put you in a place of understanding, but also maybe of financial ease to stop you overstretching yourself sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's 3 types of tenure in this country: private ownership, social rent, and private rent. Shared ownership is a hybrid.
Yeah.
Where you get the best of all worlds. And people not knowing about it, I always find it amazing nowadays. Like my 18-year-old can go and find out about trainers and know the best trainers out there. Know everything about T-shirts, trainers, and everything everywhere he wants to go, which pubs he wants to go to. But they won't spend the time researching the biggest expense of their life, which is a home.
Well, it's
so the information is out there.
It's boring.
It's boring.
I'm trying to make it fun, though.
You're here for that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Jade, it's finding out some of the boring facts and figures. It doesn't sell itself sometimes, but what does sell itself is the opportunity to own your own place, to decorate.
Do whatever you like.
Tell me, the freedom you have on a shared ownership. You hear some people saying, oh, you can't do anything to shared ownership because you don't own it. But you can. It's your home, is it not? It
is your home. Behind that front door, if you want to paint it, if you want to change things in it within reason, you can do it, right? But there are so many different things that people misunderstand or is misrepresented about the product. The simplest way I'd put it is, you know what, this is a financial mechanism sitting behind the home to help you get access to it. In every other way, you are responsible for that home. It's your home. So that is all the benefits that come with that, there are the responsibilities too.
That's a great point. There's a responsibility to every type of asset class, every type of property ownership. And you can level criticism at any type of property as well, because there's always a slight downside. Yield is an expression of risk. There's a risk in any investment. But with responsibility comes that joy of ownership, becomes that sense of home, which we all that's carnal desire, really, isn't it?
It's funny, we see thousands of people a year and they're not buying a house, they are buying a home. It's an emotional purchase, and we see people buying shared ownership every day, and they're just as emotional about it as they would be any other home they're buying. Or renting. A lot of people rent, and that's their home. Yeah. And as long as you feel that's your home, you're going to be happy with it.
It is horses for course, isn't it? So I know people that have rented their entire lives. You go to Germany, it's an absolute nation of renters, and it works there. Yeah. We seem to be a nation of purchasers, of homeowners, And it's in our DNA. And long may that remain, because that keeps me in gravy and television programmes. but the point I'm making is, if a home owner is what you want to be, this is a very viable option, which not enough people know about, I think, at the moment.
It's also funny, Jonnie, how a lot of people think they own their home,
Yeah.
but the bank do.
Yeah, certainly. The traditional mortgage,
Yeah.
I've got a 30-year mortgage. I don't own that home. The bank owns my home for 30 years. I only own that home in 30 years' time once I've paid that mortgage off. That's the reality. Anyway, I've got time for another poll, because we could, we could be here a while, couldn't we? Right, another poll for you. What is the maximum amount your household can earn per year and still be eligible for shared ownership? So what can your household earn per year? Is it £40,000 or £50,000 in London? Is it £80,000 or £90,000 in London? Or is it £100,000 and £120,000 in London? I mean, straight off the bat, they sound like huge figures.
They do.
Huge figures. So give yourself, press the button. Oh, well done, everybody. Majority of correct. But I can see why people might think of the other two answers, 11% 40 to 50 grand and 10% up to 100 grand, because, I mean, for me, they're big figures anyway. That's a lot of income coming to the household. But, Kush, you'll probably tell me that that really is an indication of where we are in the current housing crisis.
Spot on, Jonnie. I mean, if you look at it, this is an absolute pictorial view of the extent of the problem we've got as a country, right? What we're effectively saying is that there are people in the country that earn 45, 50, 80, 90,000 pounds a year who can't afford to live in that part of the world. And I think that's the absolute end of the extreme. But I think there's also something really important we've got to remember here. That is a threshold, right? The majority of people that we help are on 35, 40,000 pounds a year, and that's a joint income. So about half of the people we sell a home to are buying it with someone else. So their combined income is around 35 to 40,000 pounds a year. So I think what we've got with shared ownership is a product that actually can help people on incomes of 20, 25,000 pounds a year in lots of different parts of this country. But very often, the first thing I get asked is exactly what you asked there, 90,000.
And you just think, hold on, this wasn't designed for people earning 100 grand. It's not fair. It's for people with lower incomes. But if someone on a combined income of 100 grand can't get on the housing ladder, that says everything about where we are as a society.
I'm going to give you that example that we talked about a little while ago, John, right? So let's imagine we're sitting here in Waterloo at the moment. There's a big, whopping, great big hospital about 150 yards from where we are. 2 junior doctors there, both on £45,000 a year. They do their nighttime shift, they've done 18 hours, and actually because of the state of the housing market, they're having to rent miles away. So they've got another hour and a half commute on top. What this allows is for homes that are built in this area, for some of those to be dedicated for shared ownership. And it gives access to people who we rely on to run our hospitals, to provide those services, a decent place to live in, near to where they work.
Tell me, to give someone some inspiration maybe, what has been potentially the smallest purchase on a shared ownership, or maybe the youngest person, I don't know.
Yeah, so there are other rules with the product. So there is a minimum access point, and you've got to be 18 years of age. And as an organisation, we, like a number of our competitors, have homes available for people on incomes of 18 grand plus. And we've got schemes at the moment that you can access on the Shared Ownership Week website, where you'll be able to see some of those homes that are available. So 18 years of age, and also homes where you can buy them based on 18 grand income.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
18,000, that is a proper starter home, isn't it?
Yep. Then layer on top of that the deposit, which will be less than 4 or 5 grand. You've actually got something that for your average person who's renting a 1 or 2 bed flat, they can actually have some aspiration, some hope to buy a home, which is pretty phenomenal.
Okay, well, how about this? Let's try and bust this myth then. From what you're saying, it sounds like it's really well geared towards young people. So shared ownership, Rupert, pretty much just for young people then?
Not just for young people. Majority of people come to see us are first-time buyers, young people. Say about 10% of people are divorced, or come from a broken partnership. And there's a few older people, but yeah, majority will be young people, first-time buyers, wanting to get onto the property market.
Okay, so therefore, I'm trying to throw some myths at you. Therefore, if the majority of people are young people, are the majority of properties available starter homes? I mean, can you find shared ownership houses, for example?
In London, just by the very nature of what we build, the majority of shared ownership housing are apartments, right?
Okay.
But if you go further afield, so the organisation I work for, we cover from the Midlands right way down to the South Coast. We have houses, we have apartments, we've got bungalows on some occasions. There's a real variety of homes that are available there. And I think just on the point of myths, very often people think that this is a one-hit wonder, right? You buy a shared ownership home once, and that's the only help that's available to you. But a lot of the buyers that we have come to us with a need for a one-bed flat. Their life changes, they might meet someone, suddenly they need a bigger property. And actually, shared ownership still only remains the most viable way for them to get onto the housing ladder. So we'll help them, and we'll help them again. And that's becoming more and more a common thing.
Well, I've got a fact here based on that, actually. 20% of all shared ownership homes listed on the Share to Buy portal are 3 to 4 bedroom homes. But there's also a huge demand. The largest proportion of inquiries since January on Share to Buy have been made by families, which is about 67%. But that goes against the government's shared equity loan scheme, Help to Buy. Now that shuts, I think, for first-time buyers in March, I think, next year.
Changes, yeah.
Now, that's going to put even more pressure on it, isn't it? And making shared ownership for families even more important.
Yep.
So it's something that is going to be changing next year, isn't it?
I think there's something important there. We talked about Help to Buy.
Yeah.
Now. Shared ownership isn't something new. It's been here for 40 years, right? 40 years it's been there helping people. And in fact, the first time I ever interacted with it was at the age of 2. And I had no clue what it was. But it was my mum and dad. And my dad at that point was working for Sainsbury's. My mum was training to be an accountant. Not much income. And they bought their first home, took us out of a home, sharing with a bunch of other people, and gave us an opportunity to own a home. But the point I'm making with all this, really, is you're buying into something that's been around for decades. It's not a newfangled product that some new government has come up with and said, here we go, this is what we're doing now. This has stood the test of time. You've got hundreds of thousands of people who have bought into it, who have moved on through the property ladder off the back of it. And I just think that's a really important point to make, because often people get confused with all these different products that are out there. And
So I've got to push you on this. It's been around for decades. Has it evolved?
That's what I wanted to ask.
Go on, Jay. Get stuck in.
Has it evolved?
it has evolved. Has it evolved as much as me personally that I would have wanted to see it evolve? No. Yeah, I think what we do have is plenty of customer feedback around how we can make it better, how we can make it more focused to some of that learning. And what we are going to see, I'm sure, there's a big trajectory happening here with more and more of these homes becoming available. As Jonnie pointed out, it's not just housing associations who are providing these homes. There's a whole range of people who are doing it now. And with that comes a whole push of innovation and difference. So for example, one thing that's recognized, most people we sell to, they say, I want to buy the rest of it. And the truth is that that's not always going to happen, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But we took that on as a real challenge, and we thought, right, people want to own more. They can't suddenly buy the rest of it. If you can only afford 25%, some magic's not going to happen in a year that allows you to buy the rest of it. So we created a product which allows people to buy 1% more of their home. And in fact, that has been recognised now by the government. We've been doing it for about 4 years. The government have recognised that actually it's a valuable thing. And for future shared ownership products from 2024 onwards, that will actually be part and parcel of it. So I think your question around it evolving, things are happening, things are taking place and taking shape. I'd love to see it happening faster, but yeah.
So we've got another poll for you. And I think this poll this would be quite interesting for people to gauge on how, I mean, what we're talking about here is, it sounds like predominantly, whilst there are 3 to 4 bedroom houses, whilst there are family homes now available as shared ownership, it does seem to be a big skew towards first, second time purchasers. But I wonder how old these purchasers are these days. So have a go at this poll here. What is the most common age group for buyers of shared ownership? Okay, is it 20 to 29? Is it 30 to 39? Or 40 to 49? And I think this is all about where we are in the property market as regards to first-time buyers, but also how those first-time buyers are translating into the shared ownership market. So we've kind of, I think we've kind of touched on that a little bit, but it'd be interesting to see what people think of the age of people going into this part of this sector of the property market. I mean, I would have thought, prior to this conversation, I would have got this wrong. I would have said 20 to 29. But that, to me, the correct answer is 30 to 39 years of age, again says everything about where we are. We're talking about predominantly first-time buyers buying a share of a property, pushing 40. Yeah. You know, these people have had lives up until now. But
the overall average, isn't it, around 33, 34 across home
ownership?
ownership?
For a first-time buyer, yeah, exactly.
So if you think, I mean, I always had that view that it would be younger for shared ownership, but a lot of people had been renters before, or maybe they didn't actually want to own anything before, and now they've seen a great opportunity that's kind of showed them there is a way I can do it without, you know, sacrificing my whole life. And I think that's why it can attract a wide range of age.
Do you think, from your point of view, Jay, because you were 22 when you bought your first property,
yeah.
You obviously just thought, right, I'm going to do it. But if you hadn't done it at the age of 23, do you think you might have just thought, right, it's not going to happen for a while, and you might not have done it for a couple of years?
You know what, that I think would have happened. I think I would have tried, but because the market at the time was really hard. I mean, there were like 10 people or more to each flat that I was looking at. Exactly. So I would have definitely paused for a moment. I may have started spending my savings and then delayed myself even more. So I think, you know, if you're in that place where you're ready to buy, you should go for it then, because your mind can change along the years with whatever comes your way. And I think that's what has happened to a lot of people, which is why the age can be you know, slightly older, because life gets in the way of.
But there's always influencing factors, isn't there?
Always,
because you might be in a position to perform, but the market might be somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
Now, Rupi, do you find people approaching your company looking for a shared ownership mortgage that have maybe looked at the conventional route of buying a property and given up on it and then gone down into shared ownership?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. They looked at it, done the maths and worked out they can't do it, and then looked at other 10-year styles and discovered shared ownership. Yeah. And even then, we have you know, quite a few people, especially with the prices in London, have to, you know, across the mortgage market now, about 40% purchases, parents are helping with deposits. But we find the same with shared ownership as well, where parents will help with deposits. But
I'd be more happy to share with the deposit of shared ownership than a traditional mortgage, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so, you know, I think people go on the home buying journey, go and see something that they fall in love with, realise they can't afford it, and then go looking around at other options.
So we're seeing people coming from all walks of life. I mean, are certain people given priority? Are there special key workers schemes in place, Kush, or anything like that?
Again, a really important myth to bust there, because often people come to us and they say, oh, right, you've got to walk through hot coals to get one of these homes, don't you? And no, right? So what we've been talking about today so far is that actually the whole way the product has been set up is that it recognizes your average Joe in a decent-ish job, working hard, they are going to struggle to get on the property ladder. So it's been designed to say, we've got a broad group of people there that we want to help. Now, clearly, there aren't enough homes of this kind being built compared to the number of people that want it. So occasionally, there may well be some priority that's put there, and that might be for people living locally in that area, working locally. But on the whole, you know, the main thing is we're looking to help people who can't access a property in another way. So if you hit that criteria, the chances are you will be able to buy through this route. And my biggest bit of advice would be, you know, often people get really stuck on a location. With shared ownership, we do build it everywhere, but often that home in that particular location that you want might not be there. Think broad. look at a broad area, try and as Rupi was saying, do the research, you know?
Yeah.
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 There's another thing, there's another thing I've become aware of. Silver splitters. Ever heard of silver splitters?
I hadn't until today.
Silver splitters are people who have recently divorced, who want a room for when their children or grandchildren come to visit. I'm thinking sort of like 50-year plus sort of thing. Silver splitters. Are you anywhere near that, Rupi?
Well, personally,
Yeah. I can
not
see
the divorce
a couple
bit.
of badger hairs coming.
Not the divorce bit, hopefully.
But I mean, there's clearly a spectrum of buyers, although a concentration of a certain demographic. But you touched on something there, Kush, that there seems to be a lot of demand and maybe not a lot of supply. Now, you lend mortgages across the board. What are you
So
looking at
we'll
those
do, typically for every mortgage we do, i.e. someone's buying a house, we'll do about 8 to 9 assessments currently.
Wow.
So that's 8 to 9 people that have gone onto our website, filled in an assessment form that takes about 15 minutes, who are going for that property. And they've been filtered by the Housing Association. Then they fill in a form, and most of the time, those people just weren't allocated a property because they weren't there.
So that's 8, I mean, from an agent's point of view,
Yeah.
I would call that a qualified buyer.
Yeah,
So you've got 8 to 10 qualified buyers for every property.
who weren't allocated a property.
I mean, again, I keep going back to it. I mean, what are we going to do about this? I mean, it's great for the industry, I suppose, but there's so much supply, there's so much demand, rather, and not enough supply. I mean, what's going to happen here then, Kush?
Well, you know, the government have recently announced that they're putting £12.9 billion of funding into affordable housing. Half of that will be for shared ownership or affordable home ownership. I think the real magic across the hills, though, is the fact that we are seeing a whole variety of different organisations getting involved in this movement now. So as I said, for the last 40 years, it's been organisations like mine who have been pushing this and helping deliver these homes. But we're now seeing more and more breadth of organisation getting involved. So the best thing we can do is build more of them.
Yeah.
How can we build more? We can have more people getting involved to deliver this. And we are on the cusp of that happening now.
Now, there's multiple housing associations doing this. There's also private enterprises as well, isn't it? There are private companies that are involved in shared ownership. I mean, kind of competition, I suppose, but you're all part of this broad church and this one movement.
Yeah. And to be fair, competition, it's not. I remind you, we're in a housing crisis. We're all in this together, right?
Yeah.
We are not going to be able to build enough homes on our own as a sector. We need everybody mucking in to do this. So, yeah.
So, yeah, the more people involved in this sector, then potentially maybe the better. And
Absolutely.
with more government help and maybe pressure on the government to allocate more land for this, maybe, you know, higher percentages of available land to be developed, that could be great news.
But the other thing probably worth noting, it's not just brand new homes, right? So under the shared ownership product, once you've bought your home, you then come back to us and we will sell it for you. And for an organisation like ours, most of the homes that come to us, we end up reselling within an 8-week period. So there is a broader number of supply out there than just brand new homes. You know, there's plenty of what we call resale homes coming to the market.
Well, let's come on to that, because I think we're kind of going through almost the chronology of shared ownership, aren't we? We've gone from the why, a bit of a how, but then once you own the property, there are options available to you, aren't there, to own more of the property, something we call staircasing. And if anybody's done a bit of the research, I'll tell you what, let's speak to an expert. Ruby, just describe staircasing to me.
You're allowed to buy 100% of that home. Initially, you'll buy a percentage, be it 25, 30, 40%.
What's the minimum you can buy?
10%, and then
10%.
multiples of 5. Yeah.
Right.
That's for staircasing.
Yeah, okay.
But the minimum you buy at the beginning is a 25%.
25%.
Yeah, okay.
So over time, let's say you're a doctor, you start off as a house person on £30,000 a year, you go through the ranks, become a consultant. As you get pay rises or if you're in another sector, bonuses, you go back to your mortgage advisor and say, can I buy more of this property, please? And you sit there and go through the maths, and if you can afford more, you can buy more. All that means...
You know what? We should do a poll about this, shouldn't we? We should do a poll about it.
See what-
Most of the guys have probably looked at staircasing, just because You'll explain it far too well, and I won't ever need to poll it, won't you? So I tell you what, let's ask the
Spoil the
audience
fun.
what staircasing is. Now, obviously my laptop is now switched off, but have a go. We're going to put the poll out to you, and have a go at answering the question, what is staircasing? Is it a way for shared owners to increase their share of the property? I wonder. Is it a way for shared owners to pass household costs onto property managers? Or is it a way for shared owners living in flats to move into houses? So, we kind of know, but it's a very interesting subject, this, because I thought I knew about shared ownership until about a year ago when I started looking into staircasing and why people staircase and how much people staircase. And I think that would be an interesting point, because the whole staircasing is that skin in the game part, but I think a lot of people like to get to a certain point where they feel like they own everything, and that goes back to what we were saying earlier about, do you ever really own a property anyway? So what is staircasing? Well, unfortunately, I didn't cut you off in time, did I, Ruthie? And so, yes, well done, everybody. You've all been listening. I asked that question a little bit too late. But yes, what is staircasing? Of course, it's a way to increase your share of a property. But why do you want to do that? I mean, you've got your foot on the ladder. You've paid your 25%. You own that property. You can paint it magenta. You can do what you want. Nobody's going to sell it from underneath you. Why put more money in it?
Well, I think it's down to financial inclusion and capability. It's nice to own all of the asset. You started off owning a small proportion. You own a larger proportion. Over time, it'll be worth more. That will hopefully give you a better quality of life one day. If property prices never went up or asset values never went up, you probably wouldn't buy into it. Or if they depreciated, you wouldn't buy into it. Here, the reason people buy more is that gives them a better sense of financial security.
I'll tell you what then, it's shared ownership, yeah? So surely the guys that build the property, they want to keep their share. The housing association might want to keep their share. The property developer might want to keep their share. So I'm on a roll now. I want another poll. Let's have a poll of how much is the maximum you can buy of your property. How much can you staircase to? Can you staircase to, let's say, 50, 75 or 100%? So what is the maximum you can staircase to? Because, as a property developer, I might quite like that I've got 25% in my property and I never let that go and I've got a nice little income from that. So, that's why long leaseholds exist, right? So let's find out, let's see what you guys at home think, what the maximum is before Rupee tells you. Right. Well, you're good. You're good. Yes, you can buy 100%. Now, what would be the advantages of buying 100% and Cush in terms of maybe resale?
Yeah, so you benefit from 100% of any price appreciation on the property value. So if you own half of it, let's say it goes up by 20,000 at the point you want to sell it, you'll benefit from £10,000 of extra profit when you sell it. If you own the whole thing, that 20,000 is all yours. So I think the main financial benefit is the fact that you benefit 100% from any uplifting value. The other thing, which is an important point to note, is the rent that you're charged will go up every year. And it's a very set amount. It will go up by a fixed amount every year. But you may want to decide that actually there's a cheaper way for you to finance that bit. So that's at the point where you look and go to Rupee and say, Rupee, can I buy the rest of it? And one of the best bits of advice I'd give anybody, when you buy through this route, yearly, do your forward check, do your plan. I'm sure you want to talk a bit about that.
That's what I wanted to jump in and say. I think before you even get into it, make sure you have a plan, because I think a lot of people do get into it and think, right, I can be comfortable now. And then when they are comfortable after a while, they want to staircase, but haven't necessarily planned for it. So definitely, go in with a plan. And like you were saying, yearly, start looking at what you can afford. Are things changing with work and your salary? And then you're able to do more. But I think planning is really important, and ask all the questions. You have people like this that you can ask questions all day long.
Well, cast your mind back 4 years ago when you bought your place at 22.
Yes.
Give us these guys an insight. What was your plan? You sat down at your rented kitchen table.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Sat down in my aunt's spare room, and I was just thinking, right, I'm this age, I've got this amount of money, ideally would love to live in this area. So when you mentioned, you know, not being rigid on your areas, I completely relate because I was, and that actually slowed down my process a lot. When I started opening up the areas, I started seeing more for my money.
Yeah.
So be clear about what you like, but also be open to seeing what could be out there. And then I had a plan of 5 years. I have 1 more year within my plan. And if it goes over that, you know, I have to maybe have a plan B. But I sort of predicted where I would be at in a couple of years in terms of what I earned. But it also gave me, you know, some goals to work towards as well.
Yeah.
So I wasn't completely stagnant throughout the couple of years that I've been in my flat. I'm always aiming for more. Because you do, don't you? You're always going to set yourself new goals to keep on going, and then you might want another bedroom or another living room, etc. And I think with something like shared ownership, I view it as a step, you know, and I think that is why people staircase, because they are essentially trying to do the traditional route, but in a way that suits them.
Yeah.
And they want to inevitably get to a level playing field as someone like me who's done the traditional route. Why would you not want to own 100% of that?
Just talking about your plan, as part of your plan, did you have any ancillaries in order to help you action your plan? So you want to get to there, how do I get to there? Seek advice, or, you know, was there offshoots?
Yeah, so I mean, I was constantly researching,
Yeah.
asking questions. I was never scared to ask questions because I don't want to go into anything and then be scared and not know what I'm doing. So I want to ask all the questions I possibly can. Go on loads of viewings as well. Go and look at properties even before you're ready, because you'll really learn about what you actually really like.
Yeah.
And what you think you like or need. So it's never too early, I don't think, to start looking and start asking the questions, speak to mortgage advisors and housing associations and get those questions answered, and look at areas. I don't think it's ever too early to do that, or silly. And no question is silly, and I learned that because I was asking questions that a lot of people didn't even know. So social media is great at the moment as well, because there's this huge conversation about different routes onto the property ladder. So you can hear from people who speak your language nowadays. I think when I was buying, there wasn't many people speaking my language, so I did have to constantly be researching things off my own back. Whereas now there's a lot of information handed to first-time buyers.
I agree, especially in
Yeah.
this is still seen as a niche area, isn't it? It's still seen as specialist. So
Yeah.
the fact that you can talk to professionals, I think, is very helpful. I mean, you, with your mortgage hat on, you must get a lot of people still asking you questions
Oh,
that are
absolutely.
almost quite personal. I mean, for example, say someone said to you, right, I'm looking at staircasing. I already own a shared ownership property. I would like to staircase up to 100%. How realistic is that? I mean, what would you say to them?
I'd say, well, firstly, let's sit down and talk about it because it warrants a proper conversation.
Yeah.
And then we'd go straight to the maths and work out what they can afford. And that's very important because first you have to understand why they want to staircase. And then work out what they can afford, look at their income, look at, just like a normal mortgage again, go back to the drawing board, see whether they can afford to staircase. And then that person should go away and write down all their questions and come back with a list of questions. And then only if they understand what they're doing, they like the idea of what they're doing, and they can afford it, should they be purchasing more of a share. And I think people don't have that train of thought on what questions to ask. So go away and think about things and write down your questions, then go back to the advisor and ask them to answer your questions, and only then you should buy an extra share.
But I would imagine, I'd say from my point of view, if I was to go into the shared ownership route, I would be obsessed with staircasing. I want more and more, so I want to own more and more. I mean, is there any stats on how many people do staircase, or how much the average person staircases up to before releasing their property or selling their property?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting, weird things that happen with staircasing, right? So what we found, we've got 8,500 homes across the country. And on an average here, about 5% of our customers will buy the rest of their home. But obviously we work in property cycles. Sometimes property values are going up, sometimes they're going down. And what we find is where property values are going down, less people actually staircase. And I think that's a really important thing to check out there, is the beauty of the way staircasing works is you only ever pay based on the market value of the home at that particular point in time. So the rational, the logical thing would be that actually if the property value has fallen, right, that's the time you want to buy. So again, it goes back to the planning, it comes back to putting all your ducks in a row. But again, that's when Rupi will say, but actually, you've got to look at the whole package, and you've got to see on what basis are you able to buy the home. Is it your income that's gone up? So I'm speaking for you, Rupi, why don't you?
Well, I think, the demographic and where you are in the country, location dictates how people's trends are on staircasing. In London, we notice the buyers sometimes a bit more aspirational and wants to staircase from day one. We're like, well, you can't do that straight away. But and then when they come back to remortgage, we'll talk to them about staircasing. And it's usually on the remortgage, because at that time you might have extra equity. And looking at interest rates have come down over the last few years, so you can afford a little bit more. So when you go to remortgage, talk to your advisor about staircasing at that point, because you might find you started off with an interest rate that began with 4%, and now you've got a lot more equity, so you can go to a new bank, and that interest rate starts with 2%, with a 2.
What you're saying is, for the same outgoings, you could possibly start paying off more debt.
Paying off more debt or buying a bigger share for the same outgoings.
Really
so I think staircasing's not a sale, it's not administration, it's an advice-driven product.
Yeah.
So you need to sit there and really look at the maths, and not many people can do the maths. There's calculators out there, but you need to know the value of your property at the time, you need to know what you're paying right now, what you could be paying. So when you go into shared ownership, buy your share with what you can afford initially, but tell your broker you want to come back in 2 years or 5 years, and when you sit down for that meeting again, do tackle the staircasing question. Don't just go and remortgage without looking into staircasing. And once you get into the habit of looking into it, you might buy a little bit more, especially when in the future you can buy in smaller increments. You might realise, actually, I can save £200 a month here on my mortgage. I can buy trainers.
You're my son again, aren't you?
Yeah. Buy trainers, I can save it, or I'll buy a little bit more of my house. Ask the question and see what you can do.
Well, look, we have so many questions come through, so thank you all very much for engaging in that. But I've got one more question for you guys before we open this up to the floor, and we'll have to be quick with these. But the question comes from a lot of feedback I've had and queries I've had from people, really, in terms of the very end of this. So say you want to then sell your property. Now, I'm trying to bust a myth here, really, but do you have to give it to the housing association or the shared ownership company to sell, or can you sell it on the open market? What is the process, Kush?
So if people haven't bought 100% of a home, our interest is that we want to keep that home available to help more people. And therefore, we do have a requirement that we have an 8-week window in which we can try and sell that home to another first-time buyer or aspirant homeowner.
How is that home valued?
It's independently valued, so we have nothing to do with it. A RICS, what we call a RICS, R-I-C-S, chartered surveyor, so professional, goes out, you can choose them, they have a look at the home, and then they will tell you what it's worth independently. But what we always tell our customers, you're selling your home, you're selling your share, do your research. Again, talk to some local agents, right? Get a feel for your numbers, so when the valuer comes to your home, you're clear about what it should be worth. And that process generally works. Most of our homes that come to us to sell, we can easily sell them within that 8-week period.
Are there any? Have you got any figures? I mean, there's been a number of questions based on what sort of figures are there on reselling.
So about 85% of the homes that come back to us are sold as shared ownership through us. Where it becomes more difficult is where people have staircased to 70, 80%, and actually that market that can actually buy that is that much more reduced. And very often what we'll do is we'll take a view at that point and we'll say to the customer, look, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to sell it through shared ownership, and they can go through an estate agent straight away. And importantly, even if you own 40%, if we can't sell it within that 8-week period, you can put it on the open market with an estate agent, and they can sell it either through shared ownership or as 100% of the value of the property.
It's interesting that because, I'm selling property at the moment, and the estate agents selling agreement is 12 weeks. Obviously, I've negotiated them down, but that's 12 weeks. So you guys selling it yourselves within 8 weeks, that's a quicker process.
It is, and we recognise that, look, we've got a bit of a monopoly there. You haven't got a choice as a customer. We're saying you have to come back to us. And I think it's on that basis we're saying we're not going for 12 weeks. We want a decent window, and we know it's a proven amount of time where we can sell most of those homes and keep them as affordable.
So staying with that a little bit, there's been 10 likes for this question. If I wanted to sell my shared ownership property in the future, how is the equity calculated, and will I get my deposit back? I mean...
Yeah, so let's say you bought a property worth £100,000 and you bought a 50% share, right? You would have got a mortgage, you would have put a deposit down, and that would have been sitting in part of that financial calculation. Then fast forward 10 years later, the property is not 100,000, it's worth 200,000. So your 50% share has gone from 50,000 to £100,000 in value. So when you sell it, you will get £100,000 out of it. Obviously, you'll have to pay your mortgage off, whatever's left on your mortgage, but whatever's left after that is cash that goes to you. The remaining 50% of the value, that's our share, and that would stay with us.
Okay. So, more general, what effects do you expect COVID-19 to have on shared ownership in the next 6 months? I mean, I'm personally, Rupy, I'm thinking that things are going to be slow.
I think during this lockdown, and Kush has hit the same, we've had people sit at home for 2 or 3 months doing their research, and the pent-up demand meant we saw double-digit growth over the last 2 or 3 months. I think that's calming down a bit. Over the next 6 months, I think the type of property people are looking for might change. People want balconies and outdoor space, or near areas with gardens, but that's quite obvious. COVID-19 has definitely affected the mortgage sector, because banks are, one, they have service issues right now, as in everything's slow. Like with every sector, everything just seems a bit slower. Like your bins don't even get collected on time right now. And
my bins don't get collected ever.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got that going on. But also, you know, with the socio-economic climate coming, there's banks are going to be a little bit more risk averse. So there might be problems with people who are furloughed, they're self-employed, relying on bonuses, certain sectors. I think we just have to go through the next 6 months. I mean, I don't really know exactly which way it's going to go. We've seen some very clever people in government getting it wrong lately. So no one really knows. But if we're in recession and we've got these things going on, it will affect the mortgage market, which in turn will affect the housing market.
Okay. Another question, someone writing from London, London. How long can I wait before reselling a property on shared ownership?
I mean, if you move in and you have buyer's remorse and you're suddenly like, I hate it here, then so there's no limit. I mean, it's your home. If you decide you don't want to live there, there's nothing forcing you.
Again, that explains the sort of misconception of shared ownership. They think it's some alien product when it's a house. You own part of that house. Yeah,
we don't help it though. You know, we put names up there, staircasing and blah, blah. What the hell does that even mean, right? For your average Joe sitting out there and looking at some of the things that we say and they're thinking, what are you going on about? We call it what it is. It's buying more shares, right? And what is it that we do? We help people buy a home, and you need a smaller deposit, and your mortgage is more affordable. That's what we're talking about here. Nothing magical, nothing totally alien, as you say.
Well, there's another question. It's got 9 likes, so it obviously deserves asking. Can I make any changes to the property?
You can, within reason, right? So the whole relationship that you have with your housing provider is set within the lease. And the lease will tell you what we have to do for you, what you have to do for us, and how that relationship works. If you want to do most of the things that any homeowner would do, like paint the walls, change fittings, fixtures, you know, that's in there. But clearly, a lot of the homes that we deliver are apartments, right? Yeah. So we're going to not be very happy if you suddenly decide that you're going to take a sledgehammer and take a wall down. Or
that's the same as any apartment.
Absolutely. Or, you know, if you're going to change certain things that are in there that are design features. So it's about having a relationship with us. If there's something you want to do, you get in touch, we have a conversation, and 9 times out of 10, it's in your gift.
Here's a good one. Can or how much can the rent increase?
So they are regulated by law. There's what we call the retail price index. So Rupi, who's a finance expert, is going to explain to everybody what
You're not going to try
RPI
and
is.
explain the RPI. I'm glad I'm sat down for this.
Right now, the rent is usually anything between about 1.5% to 2.75%, and it grows with inflation. But there are caps on that, so inflation runs away. There's a cap on it, so your rent will go up, usually akin to any other private rent out there. So
Are there any mechanisms in place in terms of legislation for appealing this as well?
there's always, it can always go to arbitration. You can appeal it. Whether or not it makes any difference, I'm not sure. But
That'll be done by the RICS again, through the RICS.
The rent is regulated. It's a regulated, without getting too technical, right? But the document that I'm talking about, it provides you with legal assurances around the rent that you're charged, the rate at which it will increase, right? So that is capped at a maximum of RPI and a half. So what that really means, in real terms, is your rent will go up by 3.5% a year. Yeah? But again, this is another thing we tell all of our customers. Don't just think, how much is it going to cost me today to buy this home? Take that 10-year view and say, right, okay, what are my outgoings today? I know my rent is potentially going to go up by 3.5% a year, right? In 10 years' time, what is that going to cost me?
But, on another note, when we do a financial assessment for someone, that tells us that they're approved and what they can afford. But banks right now, after what happened in 2008, are quite risk averse.
Yeah.
They won't lend you the money to buy a shared ownership property if they thought they're doing it irresponsibly, and they're going to end up putting you in bother in the future. So there's quite a few areas there where you are protected. And foremost by the bank. The bank won't lend money.
Well, the stress testing banks are doing at the moment, I think, is as tight as I've ever known in my 25 years.
Just going back to your COVID point earlier, if that's right. I mean, one of the things that we're hearing from a lot of people we're talking to is just the sheer fact of having to be in a confined home for 3-4 months have got a lot of people focused on the idea that actually they want to do something about that, right? They might be renting a room, they might be renting property they're not happy with, and actually that's driving them to want to buy a home.
Absolutely.
That's secure.
And a lot of people have saved as well during this period as well, or been able to top up savings they already had. So it's sort of brought the goal a bit closer.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's a question, sorry to cut in, but I really want to get through some of these. We are running short on time. There's a question come through. I'm self-employed, ... Will this cause issues for purchasing? Also, what criteria we looked at in terms of salary, Rupi, i.e. previous year's income or an average of a few years?
So now in this era of COVID, self-employed, the banks are scrutinizing more. But if you're self-employed and you've got accounts that can be verified, usually up to 2 years, and you can show an income and you can show you're stable, you'll just go and apply for a mortgage like anyone else, because the shared ownership mortgages are covered by all the banks.
What sort of multiples are people looking at the moment?
Well, the stress test was at around 5, but it's dropped to about 4.5. So they don't look at multiples as much nowadays. They'll take everything into account, including your credit score, and look at your bank statements and look at every part of it and see what you can afford on a monthly basis. So there used to be a rule of thumb: 3 times income, 4 times income. Put that to one side. They look at you as an individual and look at your accounts, look at your pay slips over the last 3 months, and make sure you're good for the money they're going to lend you.
Okay.
And you can afford it.
Here's one. Who is responsible for repairs to the property? I think we know this, but...
You own the home. Right?
Yeah.
The responsibility is
The
yours.
world of responsibility.
I think, levelling, a lot of common questions you get are around that. And people say, oh, that's unfair. I own 25%, but I'm responsible for 100% of the repair and maintenance. That is the deal. And I think, again, this is so important that people get that. Don't feel upset about it after the event. Understand it. Understand what you bought into. And the benefit you're getting, the reason that's there is so that we can charge you a subsidised rent. When we build these homes, we have to pay what it would cost any private developer to buy that land, to build those homes. When we sell it to you, we're only getting 25, 30% of it back. the rent that you pay is not a market rent. So from our point of view, to provide these homes, it costs us money. And it's only because we're a business that look at life over a 35-year period that we recognise at some point in the relationship that it's actually going to financially work from our point of view. And I think as boring as it sounds, as difficult and complicated as it sounds, understand that stuff, because then it's so important for you to understand the benefits you're getting, but also the costs that come with owning a home and the costs that come with shared ownership.
I just want to, there's been so many questions based on staircasing, and I think on buying more shares essentially. And I think that's part of the success of what we've talked about here, really, because people have really grasped the fact that, yes, they're getting their first small step on the property ladder, but they can effectively, at some point, own the whole property, if they're lucky enough to save that way. So there's been a few questions coming through. One has been, do I have to pay a deposit each time I buy more shares, each time I share a staircase?
So again, probably one for Rupi, but normally people will use any equity growth that they've got on a share they own.
Yeah.
So going back to my original example, £100,000, 50% share. When you look to buy the other share, your existing share would have already grown in value. And you're using that extra buffer that you've got in your share to buy the rest of it. So you wouldn't need it. The only time I could think is if your property value has gone down since you bought it, clearly the mortgage lender would be saying to you, I need some security here, can I have some deposit?
Another question. Once you've bought your first share, can you buy the remaining share of the property? I mean, my thought there is, why are you looking at shared ownership if you think you can buy an entire property within 2 years? But could someone effectively say, in 2 years' time, right, I want to buy the lot?
If they try to do it immediately, we'll scrutinise it.
Yeah.
Because it's not in the spirit of
No.
shared ownership. In 2 years' time, as long as they can show that the income's gone up, they've got a larger deposit, we'd always run it by the Housing Association. And as long as it's clear that this person can afford it, there's no reason why not.
Because that's from my property angle, that seems to be what's changed in terms of shared ownership. Shared ownership isn't just some small part of development. Shared ownership is a development itself. Shared ownership is a wonderful product that's front and centre sometimes. This development is for people that want to get their first rung on the ladder from all walks of life. It's not just for a first-time buyer. It's not just for a silver splitter. It's for society that has a need, right?
Yeah.
It's just another tenure. Like you alluded to earlier, in Germany they rent.
Yeah.
Everyone says that, don't they? In Germany they rent. We've been saying it for years. In this country you have another tenure called shared ownership. You have your social rent, you've got your private rent, you've got outright purchase, and the fourth tenure is shared ownership. It's been going for 40 years, and everyone's very comfortable with it, including the banks and thousands of people a year. And the demand there is tenfold, and that's the worrying thing.
There is another myth we haven't talked about, and I just want to share it, right? Because often people will think, oh, right, so am I getting a property and it's a location that nobody wants to live in, or is it going to be built differently? Is it going to be really dodgy spec? That's all rubbish, right? The real truth of this is because we often need government support to provide these homes, we're highly regulated. So what that means is we can't get away with building a one-bed flat that's big enough for a Smurf and calling it a one-bed flat, right? We have got to build it to certain size standards. So normally, with a shared ownership home, you'll be getting a bigger property than what's in the market. You'll be getting a specification that understands that as a first-time buyer, you're probably not going to have money to carpet it, to put your white goods in there, to put your wardrobes in there. So you're buying that packaged offer, which won't necessarily be the case if you're buying it on the open market. So I think that's a real important thing just to get out there.
Yeah.
That these are high-quality homes in good locations and often are going to be bigger and more well-kitted out than what you get on the private market.
And it's worth saying, if you go past a development that you really like, because of the way planning permission works, i.e. the 106 agreements, it's worth asking whether there's any shared ownership in that block.
Yes.
Don't assume there's a new block going up and there won't be any affordable housing within that block. Just ask.
It's also, I mean, when you're doing your research as well, one of my tips is that if you like the look of a scheme, and it's probably still being built, go and have a look at other schemes. You've mentioned yourself, didn't you, that You sell second-hand. You sell used shared ownership products. So go and have a look at another scheme that they've built, because chances are if you like Project X, you might like Project Y. So there's a whole raft of available properties out there.
Yeah.
Jay, just briefly, I mean, this has been pretty inspirational in terms of the product that's out there, in terms of the information that's out there. But there's still going to be people there, and some questions come through, just on trying to get to the first level, trying to get to the step where they can buy their first share of a shared ownership property.
Yeah.
Any tips you would give to anybody out there that are looking at saving for that deposit?
Absolutely. Planning is the number one thing. You need to really be honest with yourself about what you are able to save, and also how long you want to do it for. Because I do hear a lot of people come to me and say, I want to buy a house next year, but they're not actually really saving enough for that goal that's so soon. So be realistic about how long you want to give yourself, and you do need to be quite strict on yourself. I think with shared ownership, you are going to have a smaller deposit than, say, someone who's going down the more traditional route, but you still, the concept still applies in saving. So having that sort of goal in mind and constantly reminding yourself, especially as a young person, where there's so many distractions coming your way, people going out, people going on holidays, not really anymore, but which is probably a great time now actually to save, because there isn't as many distractions, but when I was, it was constant. So be realistic about what you are willing to sacrifice, but ultimately you do need to sacrifice and make those changes. I've been sharing all my tips throughout the week as well on my Instagram, and it's been amazing to get the feedback, because a lot of the things I think, you know, everyone knows this, but actually no, everyone doesn't know this because they haven't had to do it before. And I think people really want that advice. So strict plan of action and have that goal in mind, and go on the viewings, because I found going on viewings before I even had enough money is what kept me going. It kept the goal in my mind and the vision, and I was able to think about what furniture I was putting where, and those small things do honestly help you say no to the distractions.
I think, gentlemen, we're getting a sense of the drive behind
The drive behind it.
it. I would not put anything in front of you that I know you can jump right over. You're quite an impressive person to talk
And
to.
also, I think be nice to your mum and dads, because
Yeah,
they
be
might
nice to them, they'll help out.
Basically, stop groupie about trainers by the sounds of it. Listen, Kush, Jay, Groupie, thank you so much for your amazing insight into this really fascinating subject. And everybody at home, thank you for tuning in. You can look at this session again and all the sessions we've had all week if you go onto sharedownershipweek.co.uk. But once more, thanks again for my panel, and thank you for joining us today. All the best. Goodbye.